welcome everybody to our second workshop of the family caregiving of older persons in Southern Africa. I'm also delighted to see colleagues here from Botswana, from other parts of Cape Town, other parts of South Africa, and representatives from Lesotho, even if they are based in the UK. So that's great to have such a wide range of colleagues coming here today. And I'm also finally delighted to have our own beloved Nicole Daniels, Dr. Daniels, presenting to us today and taking us through some thinking around ethnographic encounters and methodologies, and specifically around Fieldnotes. So Nicole Daniels, for those of you who don't know, is currently completing her second or third postdoc with the Centre of Excellence in Human Development at the University of Witwatersrand and the University of Cape Town. Nicole did a fantastic PhD where, funnily enough, it was her use of Fieldnotes, not just in her PhD, and her master's and her wider thinking, that really got me seeing the importance of that we all know about and read about in textbooks, but often don't kind of utilize or think more thoroughly about. So it was her doctoral work that is a fantastic read for anybody in the area of birth and pathways through birth, specifically C-sections in Cape Town, South Africa, but would have obviously resonance across birthing practices and ethnographies around hospitals and obstetricians, for example, across the global south more broadly. So Nicole, welcome. Hope your connection's okay now.
Hi, Elena. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me fine?
We can indeed, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here today. I am really excited about sharing, an aspect of research that and a methodology that I think is so integral to our practice, actually, as qualitative researchers, in terms of really being able to give that sort of in-depth perspective from the participants' viewpoint. Shall I go ahead?
Yes, so I think what Nicole's going to do, she's informed me that she's going to present a bit of a background, and then we're probably going to break up into groups, smaller groups, to work on some of the activities that she set for us, and then come back again, I suspect, and discuss those activities. Am I right, Nicole?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so you take it away. Thanks, Nicole.
Okay, awesome. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, and let me just put it on slideshow mode.
We can see it. Thanks, Nicole.
Fantastic. Let's go to the beginning. Okay. So yes, many thanks to the Family Caregiving group for drawing me in to do this presentation. I'm going to sort of give you a little bit of background on ethnography, and going to be shooting a bunch of questions to you. Feel free to put your hand up or just take yourself off of mute and interrupt me. I'm super happy with you doing that. I think throughout the presentation, what we want to be aware of course, relates to caregiving within families. And so while I'll talk more broadly about ethnography, it's helpful if you can come in and talk about perhaps some of your fieldwork experiences with caregiving in families, some of the insights that you've had, so that we can really think not only broadly about what an ethnographic approach to taking field notes is and what it can contribute to a sort of qualitative interview, how those notes can really situate the reader in the context in which the researcher finds themselves in this research field where the participants are located within their own life worlds. So I don't think that my slides are moving. Are they moving on your side?
They're not moving on our side. Maybe take them off this slide show. That might sometimes
Okay.
it works for me.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. If you want us to share them, if it's maybe it's data driven.
There we go.
No, it's not moving on our side.
Not at all.
Yes, it's moving on my side. It's good now.
Okay, it's going now.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotta love the technology. So I guess first off, most of us, when we think about ethnography, often think about anthropology as a discipline, and some of the books and sort of treatises that have been written across the ages often by anthropologists, but also by sociologists. Who has read an ethnography? There's some hands up. There's some hands up. Anybody want to take themselves off mute and tell us which ethnographies have stuck in your mind?
I can help. I can start.
Yeah.
So there was one I read. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was very memorable otherwise. And it was actually, and funnily enough, it was literally about 10 years that I read it, and it was based on a residential old age home in, I think it was California. I'm almost certain it was like, West Coast America. And it was about the politics of the residents and the politics of the residents in managing and running that space. So whilst the author gave us a background of the place, like the old age home itself and the city and how it came about, what was at the heart of it was how older persons within this old age home managed to kind of navigate their everyday relations with various other residents in the home in ways that kind of helped them. So it was really, really insightful work. And again, I think it was written in the 80s. But it was a classic piece in my mind about something that one rarely, I won't say never, but one rarely gets to see the inside of a residential home from the insider's perspective.
I mean, it's really interesting that you say that, Elena, considering where your academic journey has taken you, right?
I know. It's kind of ironic. It's weird.
It's totally ironic. Yeah, yeah. But I think they often are these sort of formative pieces that, because of this really thick description that a good ethnography can give, it sort of enables you to stand in the shoes of, or really look around you at the space in which these descriptions are of. And I feel more than anything, actually, it's some of these ethnographies that have left the greatest mark on my thinking. Similarly to you, I often can't remember the names of the books, and there's one piece in particular that I think I keep texting Elena to say, what was the book called? And it was an ethnography done actually also in America by two women on single mothering and poverty, and basically Hispanic and young Black mothers in the States choosing to stay single and why they did that. And it's often has to do with this sort of the quality of space and of one's imagination that gets captured in this writing, that ethnographic narrative that is often so compelling and that really can help us locate our interviews, which can seem much more like a dry transcript actually within the bigger life worlds of the participants. So somebody speak up?
Oh, did you want more inputs on things that we'd read, or?
Yes, please.
So yeah, but both my master's and my PhD theses were ethnography. So I've read a few, and particularly the one that you have up, that Fiona Ross one, I found also because of the community that I was working in, very, very, very powerful. And another one that I've read that I found it gives you, especially if it's a context that you're not familiar with, and you're trying to understand often quite complex ideas, to see them playing out within people's daily lives is really really useful. So and even if it's not related to your context, I find that just getting these broader kind of ideas. So I read this book called Life Exposed, which was about biological citizenship in Ukraine after the Chernobyl accident. I was studying disability and access to the state, but it was all about how people had used their bodies to access and their experience of being exposed to radiation to access the idea of to access state funding that was like compensation for exposure, and became this idea of using your body as a way to access citizenship. And so it informed both my master's and my PhD work, and just in terms of like providing some kind of conceptual framework, which I don't think have found or associated myself with if I hadn't kind of understood the complexities of like a story and seeing how people's experiences in one context relate to maybe what you are studying in another context, and how that links to other literature. And I find ethnography is really powerful and useful ways of I don't know, becoming passionate or interested in a topic, because it makes it real. That's what I have to say.
Thanks, Gabby. And I love this idea of making it real. Yes, I used Fiona's book, Raw Life, New Hope, because it is often a classic text that humanities students come across quite early on in their studies. And of course, one of the things that I think a good ethnography does is not only does it help people sort of outsiders understand an insider perspective, right? But for insiders as well, there's something of the recognition of themselves that is really phenomenal, and it's often and I once heard somebody speak saying, my life was captured by this researcher who came and described something that I knew intimately but had never, vocalized. And I think this is the case because as researchers, sometimes we're in the field as insiders, right, who already know the space, who already know how things happen and take place. And part of the challenge there is, in fact, describing some of these taken for granted, sort of second nature aspects of the field. For example, how one accesses the field, right? Whether it be on foot or by bus or taking a taxi. I recently did an art project in rural Limpopo, and the biggest story that came out of that project for me was, in fact, accessing the different tribes who were. It was around Lake Fundudzi, and these different tribes that were located at different parts of this big lake that's very difficult to get to. And it was day-long trips that we had to take on these, dirt roads that were almost completely inaccessible, but along which, the most kind of rickety cars seemed to be able to go, along which there were cattle and people and singing and, the smell of firewood burning and most of all, it was this aspect of rural life that captured my imagination. That was always the story that I wanted to tell to my children in describing what was I doing. And I think it's these descriptions that really lead us into, and for example, the story of what it takes to get to this lake, right? Where in fact, many of these tribes that were protectors of this lake didn't actually have access to the lake. And we had to be given a community spokesperson who could lead us through these tiny little roads through these bushes that hardly looked like roads, but more looked like cow pathways, to be able to access this hidden lake in the middle of these mountains, in which the only sounds were of the occasional bird and cowbell ringing across the distant hills. So an ethnography is a research method used by both sociologists and anthropologists. And
Nicholas, yes, I think one other participant did have their hand up.
Oh yes, please.
If I'm not mistaken, Amakuleni. If it's still relevant, I don't know if you want to share.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can share quickly. So I just recently, I'm doing a multidisciplinary degree, master's, and I major in history, sociology, and anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
And I recently read, I read a lot because I want to focus on youth study, but also doing my thesis on a resettlement history. So kind of following youth from that perspective. And one of the ethnographic text that I read was a book by Kiana Bridges, and she did an ethnography. I can't remember what it's called, but I just remember how she could bring out race and class, and the whole book is just focused on those two themes within a hospital context. Mm-hmm. And it was based in I think Brooklyn, New York, and she told the story to a point that I felt like she was telling the story of the hospital in my village, and
wow.
And describing how class and race were prevalent from the moment people walk into the hospital. And she followed pregnant women, and that whole what the antenatal classes, and the choice for that, and medical aids, and also how doctors and healthcare, how everybody would talk to people, how they would classify people, even from conversation, and the assumption that everybody needs to choose this. And it was just like a deep conversation that I felt she was having with me personally, on the hospital context, on race and class, and having to bring that out through field work. I felt like that was very powerful. And I kind of like how I would say anthropology as a whole has an aspect of deepening meaning and definitions of and challenging us of our perspective of what we think of certain meanings and what we've attached to it as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the way that an ethnography can somehow speak to another person. And that's what I've heard from everyone who has shared their story, is that somehow they felt personally spoken to, right? And that really relates to this idea of which, and I'm struggling to move my slides again, but of the narrative that is constructed from an ethnography, right? The story that an ethnography tells, that we've all experienced this power, this gripping nature of it, that allows us somehow to enter that conversation. I loved what you said about it. Felt like she was speaking directly to you, because somehow, and I think that this is often the way that research themselves can speak of their locatedness within a research field that somehow speaks to the reader. I'm just going to...
Nicole, I'm going to share my screen for you.
Will you? Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. I'm going to stop. Okay, cool. So, yeah. Slide 2.
Fine.
So this was just to say that, right, that how ethnography achieves this is through this concept of thick description, right, which resides at the core of ethnography. And however that description is constructed, it is the intense meaning of social life from the everyday perspective of the group members, that is sought through this ethnographic narrative that the researcher constructs. And so I often think that it's a great accompaniment to other qualitative methods, like interviewing, like participant observation and observation. Now, depending on what you are doing, right, observation by itself can accompany interviews, surveys. Participant observation is obviously when the researcher is also involved in the life worlds of their participants. And of course, much of the ethnographic method describes that and comes through these long extended periods of the researcher living with the culture or group that they are describing. But in fact, we can offer a kind of ethnographic snapshots and ethnographic moments just through being in a research field for a short period of time. And I hope that some of you got a chance to do the little exercise leading up to this workshop that we're going to discuss in groups a little bit later. Next slide, please, Ada. So, you know, what we describe, the kinds of insights that an ethnographic analysis can offer are patterns like, you know, power dynamics in an old age home, like the pattern of staying, having children, but staying unmarried in a population, why those choices are made. These patterns that are visible in a group culture that that, for example, we can understand by looking at survey data, but we often don't understand that deeper meaning in context, right? And it was often in the ethnography that I spoke about. Women felt like once they could rely on their children, but in fact it was the father of their children that they couldn't rely on, and that's why they chose to stay unmarried, but have these very strong mother-child bonds. And so this thick description is what generates this deep understanding and this deep meaning that we've spoken about, that comes across so well in an ethnography, about what is actually transpiring and taking place, and the thoughts behind some of these patterns, these dynamics that we see, and how these play out in intricate ways in everyday life. So these narratives are developed from the stories of the cultural group identity, from this insider perspective, which allows you to really step into the shoes of the participants, to allow for that in-depth qualitative insider perspective and a holistic cultural portrait. Next slide, please. So the question then arises that how do you write field notes? How do you enter into a field as a researcher, possibly someone who has some insider status, either if it is because, they have some kind of experience through a family member or through themselves of something related to the research question, or not at all, right? Or they completely are outsiders. For those of you who have done an ethnography, what have been some of your tips and tricks? How have you taken field notes?
Nicole, I can't put up my hand because I'm busy. Fine if I speak.
Yes, please.
Okay. With regards to some of my research, what I often do is just keep voice memos, like while I'm in the field, moving between different houses or whatever. Then I just voice note myself and like just keep myself narrate what's going on around me, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I've got to say, Veda, that similarly to you, I was very reliant on my voice notes during my PhD. And in fact, I used a software called Otter that was free. And it allows you to both record a voice note and it transcribes it at the same time. Because what happened kind of, a little bit into the research was, of course, I was madly transcribing these interviews, which take, a ton of time. And I sort of felt like the field notes that I was writing, I wasn't having time to write it up. And so using Otter as a way of taking voice notes to capture what I was thinking while I was in the field was a really useful way for me to just have an automatic transcript that then I could download and just attach little sticky notes to and read through. And that's accompanied my practice of transcribing interviews really nicely.
Nicole, there's a question from Tandy, or a contribution from Tandy. Go ahead, Tandy.
Thank you very much. I was going to say I normally would just write notes, like what I'm observing. Even when I'm having my research assistants, I would normally just ask, like, don't just take note of what the Q&A bits of the interviews, but really just the surroundings. So what are you observing? So I remember one particular time when I observed that I was interviewing a woman, and then her child came over to her and leaned on her, and just that relationship. It was about living arrangements of young children during the time of HIV, but just observing the relationship that woman was having, who was not necessarily, I mean, I just thought that was something just to relate and to note, just that little child and the interaction that the child was having with the mother. So little things like that I write down, but I like this idea, and I'd asked of voice notes because sometimes these things take time. So I had sent a question about how do we even spell Atta, just so that I can take note of it.
Ah, yes. Let me, I can also put it in the chat, but it's just OTT, I think it's OTTER. Yeah, and there's a paid version, there's a free version, and I had the free version on my phone, and I've never had to upgrade it. There's massive storage allowed, and yeah, it can even, I think, you can even use it in an interview, and it can also transcribe several voices. I don't know if the free version allows for that. As I say, I just used it for those interview notes. Somebody else has their hand up.
Yeah,
And Gabby?
Gabby had, yeah.
Yeah. Tandi, I just wanted to say, I often think of those as ethnographic snapshots. And those snapshots, I think, are so powerful. The way that just seeing that moment relates to you so much about the relationship, and being able to describe that and just insert that as this sort of snapshot of a moment in time, in which you deduce as the analyst a whole lot of information about the quality of the relationship, the kind of relationships that exist, and the underlying emotions too. Thanks, Gabby.
Hi. Firstly, I had a comment on Otter. It doesn't work so well with interviews with multiple voices. It gets a lot of the words wrong or mixes it up. It's not so easy. I think it works well for like an individual, but if you even just an interviewer and a respondent, I find it quite challenging. You have to really clean things up and listen to it again, because it sometimes gobbledygook. But in terms of the notes, I've been in situations a lot where I've not been able to record, and for my PhD I couldn't record at all because I was in doctor-patient interactions, and so I found what was most helpful is really just writing everything that you can down, almost kind of verbatim, so that you can really pick up, like, okay, well, how are you feeling? How are they feeling? What was said? What did the person's face look like? Whatever. And then sitting in the car afterwards, or at home as soon as possible afterwards, and writing up like a summary of the day and how you felt, and your reflections on some of those experiences and how they're tied to other things, and like setting the scene in a way that because I wasn't able to like even record interviews or suddenly stop and make a little voice note for myself. So I think that also using your pen and paper, but then spending the time in remembering and reflecting can also be very useful in then kind of the storytelling part afterwards.
Thank you, Gabby. That's really important, because similarly, I also was allowed into certain spaces where I was not allowed to record, and I found it really essential that I had space and time afterwards, and it was often for me sitting in my car, where I had to type it up, because my memory was also like a sieve. So although I wrote pen and paper notes throughout, and I was often scribbling, and I'd often have some of my obstetricians who'd by now seen me several times kind of ask me, what are you writing on those notes? Because they can also feel a little self-conscious, which I understood over time, returning to these same places was they wanted to know, and I would often just read to them, but takes new needle out of a packet, goes and swabs the arm, and puts the needle in to take blood, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and often once they heard what I was writing, was sort of relieved, because it's so mundane, really, and yet it's often these sort of very mundane and repetitive, normalized behaviors and actions, that is what this rich, thick description of an ethnography allows us to be able to get this very deep insider perspective of things that for participants themselves might be, just totally everyday and overlooked.
Nicole, if I may, I know Karis is also here in the room, but one thing, because we're working in pairs. So, and we're in the same space initially, in family homes, and then maybe we break out into different rooms to work and speak to different people in the family. But then ultimately, we're usually traveling home together, especially on longer journeys when our field work is, let's say, an hour and a half away or whatever. And so we end up having these long conversations about what we've, been thinking and seeing. And so both of us actually said that we need to capture the conversation that we're having, because that's another form of field notes in conversational mode, not just our own thoughts, but that kind of co-construction together. I know Karis is here, but I don't know if she can comment as well on that.
Hi, yes, hi everyone. So definitely, I think the conversations also helped with my understanding the household. Once me and Elena get in the car and we start talking, I think I also mentioned that we should record it. We should have a voice recording of our conversation, because it just helps give a better understanding of the household that we were just in. Thanks.
I think definitely, and I would suggest Otter for something like that, because so I never use Otter if I'm in a sort of proper interview. I always do record it and do that transcribing myself. But I think that it's great for this kind of thing, where in fact what you're saying is, you're getting that first-hand experience, and then when you're in conversation with, I think that that's super rich data, and don't you dare tell me that you're not recording it, just because the recording then gives you can just download it, and because it's already written by Otter, when you read it and you're sort of cleaning it, you will often then also you can highlight it, and you can put your own little sticky notes and just add comments that are often then further analytical thoughts, but it provides a really great basis from which to deepen your analytical and understanding, and have a just rough version of those kinds of conversations that then you can also refer to later on. And especially, it gets dated, and it becomes a really useful part of your archive of the research, I think, and allows you to be able to track also how your analytical insights are developing and are expanding, especially through, as this beautiful co-construction between you two as researchers, having just left the field. Okay, so I want to get us into breakout rooms. Let's go to the next slide, Veda. I'm not sure. Yeah, so as I just said there, we often develop our own field note system as researchers. And again, of course, what that system looks like will be different for different researchers in different field sites, with different kinds of permissions from the different set of gatekeepers, right? It might be that you can take photos actually of your research field. Those are super useful and helpful. It may be that you can give your participants a camera, right? And they can do, so of course that's usually photo-centered thing, but you can also use it just to ask participants to describe certain aspects of their life, and then being able to show a photo and then describe that to you, or why they've taken that particular photo is very useful. And of course that helps to generate that kind of thick description of a lived life. You know, so there's sticky notes, there's voice recorders there, and you know, handwritten notes, pen and paper, of course, and then what you write up on your laptop, and the way that you are able to organize those notes. Also, I knew that there were some people using Evernote, for example, that kept track of their field notes in that way. There are a whole lot of apps and things on the market these days that can really help one keep those in a sort of tidy, organized way, because the other thing is that it becomes completely unwieldy, you know. And I still have my sort of 8 to 10 notebooks that I think I took of these handwritten notes throughout my PhD. But it was useful to be able to have links on my desktop to an electronic version that referenced the notes in those notebooks, because I found that I often didn't want to go back to the notebooks, but I needed to have a sort of contents page that told me what all was in each notebook, and then drawing out references from those handwritten notes into an electronic document that could somehow then make its way potentially into the write-up and into the methodology for some of the readers to be able to have some insight into that process that began with the pen and paper. So thank you, Veda. Is there a quick show of hands of who was able to do the little exercise before the workshop? I don't see any raised hands. Oh, yes, there are some. Okay, that's looking good. So what I'm going to do then, I'm going to lean a little into my own doing of that exercise, and then I'm going to break us up into little breakup rooms. There'll be about 3 people in each room. You can either share from your experience of writing those notes, what stood out for you, and for those who weren't able to do the exercise, I think you can still use this 3-point layout to be able to think through maybe some of your experiences in the field. For me, because the issue of like how to write field notes is not well detailed anywhere, and I think that's also because there's no one way of doing it, right? And this is also really important to remember. There's no real right and wrong to it. But you often need a method that you can also be able to say later on, you know, I did this, this, and this. And so for me, these 3 ideas were really important. Scan the field was, so I only really remembered scan the field, track the field, write up in context. Okay. Scan the field told me immediately that what I was doing was I was looking around me. Okay. I was trying to scan for what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? What am I doing? What are the people around me doing? You know, where am I? And that's at the level of just information. Thanks, Gabby. That's so lovely. Thank you for being here and your contributions. The next level relates to tracking the field, right? Now, this was actually identifying, right? Who are these people? You know, what are they doing here? What are the different sets of actors, the different kinds of materials that are gathered here? And that's to distinguish between this one level of scanning for information and then being able to track and identify these different patterns and what is happening. And then the third stage became for me the write-up then that I often did kind of when I was no longer in the field. Okay. So the first two, the tracking and the scanning of the field, I wrote on pen and paper and with pen and paper. And then the write-up of the knowledge and context where I was doing more interpretive work was often on my computer at the end of the day when I was, or some hours later. I'm going to read to you quickly my interpretive write-up of my observations that I did yesterday, quite just briefly, before we separate into groups. Next slide, please, Veda.
Oh, it's coming. Just give me a sec. Sorry.
No problem. I'll start reading out so long. Okay. A siren rings loudly in the air, and next to me, the high stainless steel gate on runners opens to allow vehicle access, and within seconds, a flood of voices follows as a torrent of school children make their way out the school gates. There are many with white scarves over their head, revealing the large Muslim contingent at the school. They carry books and balls, cell phones, and heavy backpacks. But the uniform has accomplished what it's supposed to. There is the overriding sense of neatness. The girl's tunic has a collared neck that buttons down. It is tapered neatly at the waist with a belt and practical pockets on the thighs. The girls all wear them above the knees with either maroon blazer or V-neck jersey with yellow detail that matches the dress, with its pattern like a mathematics quad with small checkered squares in shades of yellow mustard. The boys have their formal grey pants on, far too hot for this weather, white shirts tucked into black belts, and ties wound tightly around their necks. I wonder how they cope. I would have expected to see the boys immediately loosening their ties, pulling their shirts out, but only one boy has his shirt hanging loose, and I wonder how it is that the school enforces such neat wearing of their attire. I remember at my high school when I substituted the standard issue white V-neck with a round neck and was forced to go to the deputy principal's office. "Salam, ma'am," shouts a boy who signals to me that I've been noticed. He's headed along with the biggest part of the sea of children leaving the school to a row of buses that line the street on the school perimeter, completely congesting the flow of traffic. Most of these children must travel from far, and home time is still a way away. The school is an outlier in this mostly wealthy area, although just flanking the school is a small section of low-cost housing. The electronic sign on the board outside of the school hall advertises that the school is celebrating its 75th year, a 98.4% matric pass rate and an 84% bachelor's pass for its 2022 grade 12s. The term on school dates for 2023 and the school motto, eager to learn, learn to serve. The impact of Apartheid's Group Areas Act is clearly visible here, with the racial markup of the school body hardly changed. This was also the school my father and his brothers went to nearly 50 years ago, and the walk across the railway over the bridge to the coloured area would have been very far. Unlike the other parents waiting in their cars, though, I don't have a child at this school. Mine only comes for a half-an-hour drum lesson once a week, so my behaviour as I sit resting against an old tree stump, my feet out of their shoes so that my toes can feel the soft grass, is unusual. I had slipped into the fenced grounds through a slight opening in the vehicle gate without using the intercom and having the pedestrian gate opened by secretaries who would have screened my entrance. I realize now that few would even know there was a patch of grass in this tight corner of the teacher's car park, let alone sit in it. So that was a written up description of 3 pages of notes, I think 1, 2, 3, very, very badly written, right? That make for difficult reading afterwards, in a sort of 10 minutes or 15 minutes that I spent during my daughter's drum lesson as this school came out. So before we go on to this next slide, Veda, can we put folks into groups? How many are there here in total? Are we 30 people or 24?
I think we are 22.
22, yeah.
Okay, there's 22 people. So maybe we can have groups of 3 with one group of 4.
Okay, awesome. I'm busy setting that up now.
Okay, great. So part of what I want you to think about is clearly you could tell from that piece of this written up text that is more of this knowledge and context that is bringing together bits of my knowledge of what I had seen, what I had heard, and what I was doing, and relates it more broadly, right, to the fact that actually the school's located in this kind of quite wealthy area, but there's this low-cost housing just flanking the school. And then it has me thinking about, this celebrating 75 years has me thinking about the fact that my father attended the school about 50 years ago and how far it would have been for him to get home. But I don't think that in those days there were buses, right? And this is what really stood out for me at the school, was that were all of these buses that kids filled to be able to get home far away from this very wealthy area. So I'd like you to be able to share some of what you did in this exercise, and just to, in groups, reflect on the kinds of detail that an ethnographic approach and the making of field notes, how it hones one's thinking and one's seeing, and what that opens up in terms of the description of this broader field.
Nicole, sorry to interrupt. 2 things. There is a question. I'm going to come to that question from Tandy. But just can you reiterate the 2 questions you're asking of us in relation, and is it in relation to the contribution you just made now, or to our own observations?
So I'd like you to use your own observations.
Okay.
I read out my own just because I didn't think that everybody had done the exercise, and that perhaps they themselves could think about that sort of difference. But yes, perhaps the people to go first can rely on their own doing of that exercise to just reflect back on it. What could be different from the writing of the notes to how it was written up, and just what that experience was like of that kind of detailed taking of field notes and of examining and scanning the field.
Okay. And then the question from Tandy was, based on discussion today, what's the difference between ethnography and observational research? Tandy.
So an ethnography is about giving an insider's view, right? But an ethnography is based on observation. So observation is what we do to write up an ethnographic account, which was what I just read to you now, Tandy. That would be understood to be an ethnographic account based on my observations of the exiting of the school. Now, I was sitting in that school for a longer period also than just when the bell rang. But when I sat down to write in my interpretation, in my writing up of my knowledge in context, right, I went immediately into what had the biggest pull for me. Now, I just got there early with my daughter, and so I went and I sat in the school grounds to do this exercise, not knowing what I would find. But when that bell rang, it you know, shattered that space so much of this mostly static field, right? There was a hall, there were cars, there was everything. Yes, it was mostly static at that time. The minute the bell rang, there was just this explosion of energy, of people, and I had this massive insight suddenly into, of course, the core of this field site, which was these children at a school and their experience of now leaving the school. So then when we do a write-up, and what our ethnography does is it often hones in exactly on that point of gravitas. And what is the point of gravitas? And it's often what is most strikes you afterwards about this field and what is central to what's taking place there.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, the groups are set up, and there is, I think we're going to allow 10 minutes per group, but I think Thandi wants to say something before we all
please.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to take much time. I was just thinking, because I often anthropologists in particular would make an argument that you need to have observed these multiple times. You need to have been there for a lengthy period of time. For example, they'll talk months. So I'm just trying to get the difference. So yes, observations are part of ethnography, but when do we say I have conducted an ethnography? I think
right. And that's a fantastic question, you know, because not all qualitative research is ethnographic research, as you say, but there is a quite a strong, you know, methodological basis from which you can speak about having ethnographic snapshots and ethnographic moments. And this is what these are. These are detailed observations of a field site. So if you've got a mainly interview-based research project, you can accompany this with these detailed ethnographic field notes, which are notes from your being in the field. So, of course, in a traditional ethnography, you spend months in a particular field site in which you do, and then it's mostly participant observation. It's not just observation. You participate in the life worlds of your research participants, okay, in the cultural group, and so raw life. Fiona Ross went and lived in a coloured township, right? Asanya Benya in sociology went and actually lived as a mine worker doing mine work. Okay, so yes, those are traditional ethnographies. But what we can do is, as qualitative researchers, is we can supplement our interview research, right, with these ethnographic moments, these ethnographic snapshots. And as I said, there are a range of ways in which we can get those kinds of snapshots. You can also ask participants to keep a sort of journal of their time in the research project. And that can be also this allow these ethnographic snapshots of the participants' daily life. And it can also be the researchers accompanying notes, field notes of their experiences in the field, even if they come and go from that field. Like I come and go once a week to my daughter's drumming lesson, okay? The difference was when I went into the school grounds yesterday, I went with this task in mind. So I went as a researcher and I sat and I found a space on the field, right? When I usually drop by, I'm also like the other parents and I just sit in my car. But so there's something that we do as researchers that is different when we go to make these kinds of observations. We go specifically to look and see, and this can also be part of our research practice in going and interviewing, right? Is that we can go early or stay later to be able to describe in more detail what the kind of context was of this interview, right? Who were these two people taking place? What did I arrive as a researcher? What was already framing my thinking? But then also, who did I meet? You know, who was this person? What did they look like? How did we get here? Did we catch public transport? You know, where were we located? Was it a busy place? Was it quiet? All of those sorts of things, which contribute both to an understanding of this co-construction of knowledge that occurs within an interview, right? But is also formed by the context in which we're in, the broader context. And that can be a political context, you know, it can be a cultural context. It can just be also a particular kind of setting that leads to the conversation transpiring in a particular way that also helps informs the kind of analysis that we make of that interview at a later stage. Does that help, Thandi?
Absolutely. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. Okay, let's take 10 minutes away in breakout rooms.
Okay, I'm going to do it right now.
Thanks, Veda.